Hey everybody, how's it going? It's about 4 minutes till we get started today. It's right now Tuesday, March 23rd, 12:40 p.m. So hope you guys had a great weekend, and yeah, just take a few moments and we'll get started with our part 2 of this review session for the midterm. Eddie, 1 second. Eddie? Cool. Big Eddie. Oh yeah, not to worry, Devin, for sure. My office hours are always scheduled Thursdays from 11:30 till 12:30. So just drop in anytime. I'll post the link for the Zoom for those office hours probably on Thursday morning, early in the morning. So if you have that hour free between 11:30 and 12:30, then just swing by and I can take whatever question or anything you have. So hopefully that'll work for you, Devin. But yeah, no worries. Cool. So just a few minutes to go. Hi there. Hi, Ariana, Devin, Anthony. Welcome back. Matthew, hello. Oh, nice. That sounds pretty good, Noah. Hi, Trevor. Everybody, good to see you all. Sorry, Ariana. Yeah, you know what? Actually, I have to restock. So I'm just going with flat water, basic stuff. But no, good observation. I'll get it back soon. Hi, Tatsuma. Good to see everybody here. Okay, guys, it's pretty much about that time, so let's just get things slowly started here. Good afternoon, everyone, and I hope you're doing well. It's part 2 of the review session, so that's the basic plan today. It's pretty straightforward, so we've already been taking a look at the study guide. Last Thursday, we did our first piece of this review session, and we really went into good depth on all the material in Chapter 8 and Chapter 7. So today, we're going to just jump off from there and continue through the study guide, and as long as it takes, then whenever we're done, we'll be good to go. And next class period, Thursday, that's when you guys are taking the midterm exam. Then you're heading off for spring break, and then we just continue with the remaining dates as you see listed in the syllabus after we get back. So what I would like you to do, of course, then, whenever you can, if you haven't already got it out, is to just pull out a copy of your midterm review document. How many questions are on the test, Noah? There's going to be about 25 questions, each worth 4 points. 25 times 4 is 100 points. But since it's 20% of the class value, I'm going to double the score. So it's out of 200 points, but if what I'm saying makes sense to you, I'm scoring it out of 100 and then just doubling the amount. There will also be a couple of bonus questions at the end. So in total, there are going to be 27 questions. The quiz was, I think, 17. So there's a few more questions on it for sure, and it just covers more material from the whole class. Okay, so thanks for that. And hi there, Con and everybody else. So as I was saying, we're about to resume our midterm review session. Next class period, Thursday the 25th. We won't have a meeting. We won't have any like YouTube or Zoom or anything. We're just going to have the test distributed to you guys at class time. Noah, I've said many times, you got to just email me at any time. I'll tell you your grade, and it's ready to go. So, but you got to email me. Just have to come to me. You want your grade? Come get it. I've got it. Okay, but you got to email me, and then I'll reply. Devin, you say you took up the time limit on the first quiz. Will you have more time to submit? Well, it's going to be the same amount of time, so you're just going to try to have to be a little concise. I'll be reasonably flexible. I mean, if there's some students that need a couple of extra minutes, usually I'm not going to be punitive. But we all got to try and stick to the same parameters. So do your best to just get it done within the frame of time allotted. With 25 or so questions, and you have about 90 minutes. I'm also going to distribute the test like about 10 minutes before the official class time. So overall, you're going to have a little more than 90 minutes or so to do all the answers. So just budget your time accordingly and try to keep moving through the answers. And then when you're done, you can always go back and add information or detail if needed. Okay, not to worry. Thanks, Noah. And that's for everybody, though. Just email me if you ever have questions about your current grade or your other scores. The other assignments have been graded. Okay, so thank you. All right, then let's go on to these notes and this review session. And as I mentioned just prior to this, have your study guide out so that we can all do this together and go through the different questions as one. Okay, so I'm looking at the stuff now on Chapter 1. We already went over the Chapter 8 material last time. So starting with this question, tell me, anybody, what's the Milgram experiment? Which one was Milgram's experiment? So Chapter 1 started with some discussion of these famous social psychology experiments, and that's a topic that we should all be aware of as well as we get prepared for the midterm. So what's the Milgram one? That's the question for now. Hi, Alina and Lauren and all the rest. Always good to be with you guys. So we're jumping into our review session, and the first question to just go through is, okay, Devin, Milgram. Milgram experiment showed the extent to which people will follow authority even when the instruction is contrary to the subject's moral beliefs. 2/3 of all subjects administered all the shocks. Good, I like the way that you put it. In the full answer that you might give if this was chosen for like the test, then you would also want to just say a few basic facts about the setup of the experiment. So pretend, for example, that you were going to conduct the study yourself. Like what would be the way of setting it up? So you basically are going to have two subjects, one in the role of teacher, one in the role of learner. The teacher is going to be told that they have to give electric shocks to the learner whenever they get a memorization question wrong and give a more intense shock with each new wrong answer. In fact, though, there was no real shocks happening, but the teacher didn't know that, and we were just trying to see how far they would go, even though the person would be crying out in pain and demanding it be stopped. And it did show that the majority, around 2/3, gave all the shocks. So important lesson for us to remember is that we sometimes are too deferential to authority. We don't think enough for ourselves or think independently. And sometimes we'll try to shift the burden of responsibility to other people like that. Okay, then the second question on that same list, what about the Zimbardo one? So which one was the Zimbardo experiment? Not the one with the false electric shocks that were perceived to be real, but the other one. So can anyone even say a word about the Zimbardo? Philip Zimbardo's experiment, right, Mateo. It is the Stanford Prison experiment. And again, any kind of explanation of it would just involve a few core points. You'd have to say that we were trying to simulate a prison environment at Stanford University. The subjects that were student college age were divided into the two groups of prisoner and guard, and they were supposed to run this simulated prison for 2 weeks, but it had to be stopped after just 6 days because of the evident abuse and trauma that was being imposed upon the prisoners by the so-called guards. Once again, placed in a social situation where some people have authority and power and others lack it, and loose oversight guidelines, people sometimes are bound to lapse into poorly considered and inhumane behavior. So good critical thinking helps to counteract that as well. Okay, so the next question on our study guide asks, what are the 3 stages of cognitive development? So there's 3 stages of cognitive development. And if you could even just offer me those words or any description of them, then we can get that behind us. So what are those different stages? And we are looking at notes that you would find in Chapter 1, either in the book or your written notes from the Chapter 1 part of the class. So after Zimbardo and Milgram, we talked about these stages of cognitive development. What could those 3 stages be? Just let me know. 3 stages of cognitive development. Okay, good. Prue. Dualism, relativism, commitment. And so cognitive development is the lifelong process of acquiring intelligence and problem-solving ability. And according to some researchers and psychologists, there's 3 general phases of this. So the first one is labeled dualism, where a person's mental perspective and outlook is that all the facts and truths are totally all set forth and they're known, and it's all black and white. So truth is all black and white, and authority figures know all the answers to everything. And so you just listen to them and defer to them and don't have to think for yourself. The second stage, when you get further beyond that, is called relativism. Now the person thinks that truth is all just a personal opinion, so truth is just subjective and there's no hard facts. At that stage, the person then believes that since truth is all opinion-based and just, subjective, that no one should treat anyone's beliefs differently than anyone else's, and we should treat all these opinions as having equal status. But then beyond that, there's the commitment level, where you now think that you can commit to your own views based on reason and the best evidence that is available. But at the commitment stage, you no longer just believe that truth is relative. You think there really are objective facts. But unlike the dualist, you don't just think that it's other people above you that can somehow figure these facts out and just deliver them to you. So you think you're one of those people that's a competent judge of the truth, and you can reach the conclusions that you commit to on your own judgment and the best evidence. So dualism, relativism, commitment. Okay. Now, next is a question. Can anyone say what is confirmation bias? It's kind of one of the obstacles to being a good critical thinker. But what exactly is this idea of confirmation bias? Maybe someone will know that. So whenever you're ready, just let me know if you have a sense of what confirmation bias could be. Big problem, I think, in our world. So knowing is half the battle. What is it? It's a type of bias. Which kind is it? What does a person with confirmation bias do, or how do they seek information? Let me know. Let all of us know. We're just waiting on your answer. Sometimes it does take a moment or a couple moments, but the information's there. It's all out there. You just gotta get it. Okay, Caleb. So confirmation bias, looking for information that agrees with them. Yes, that's right. I might put it even more strongly though. It is only looking for information that supports what you already agree with or what you already believe. So exactly, Anthony, it's looking for information, but not looking for information that contradicts anything that you already believe. So it's a biased way of seeking out research and facts. It's only looking for supporting evidence or facts. So like if a person thought that, I don't know, the policy of gun control was wise or that it was not wise, on either side of this debate, you could imagine a person with confirmation bias only looking at a selected set of facts that tends to support their chosen conclusion and not considering the evidence and information that people on the other side of the debate might hold. So anyway, when we look for information, we got to make sure that we examine all sides and that we don't just try to seek the facts and information that support what we hope or think is true. If we do that, that's confirmation bias. And given the tools that we have to do information seeking nowadays with the internet and everything, it's more easy than ever for someone to, go down into a rabbit hole of friendly information that supports whatever things, even wild things that they may think are true. So just be impartial and unbiased in the pursuit of evidence and information. Noah, you're back. Okay, not to worry. Cool. Well, I'm sorry about that, but at least it's working for you now. Okay, so good then, guys. We've talked about confirmation bias, so we can go ahead into the next topic. The next question listed on the study guide has a whole grab bag of terms that are sort of condensed into one. So I just did that to sort of save some space. But basically, the question asks about what are the different qualities that good critical thinkers usually exhibit or what they have. And it lists a range of them. So analytical skills, effective communication, research inquiry skills, flexibility, open-minded skepticism, what is the method of doubt, what is collaborative learning, and what is creative problem solving. So we could just go through those, I guess, kind of piece by piece quickly. Analytical skill is just the ability to have the ability to support your beliefs with logical reasons instead of having unfounded opinions. So the ability to provide support and backing for your beliefs instead of just having no basis at all. Effective communication. So that's the ability to speak and write well and clearly, but also being able to listen carefully and knowing how to adjust your communication style depending on the circumstance that you're looking at. So speaking and writing well, listening well, and having awareness of different communication styles of people. Inquiry skills, knowing how to collect and gather data for the purposes of research, and then knowing how to put all those pieces of information together to demonstrate the information to other people. Knowing how to find reliable versus unreliable and false information, collecting it, and putting it together in a logical order that can then be presented to people. Inquiry skills, so the ability to find facts for research and then put it forward to others. Flexibility, what is that? Well, it's in the mental sense of flexibility, the ability to change your mind or your plans when it's important or when it's necessary, and also being open-minded to other alternative ideas aside from your own. So flexibility is seen within a person who does have that capacity to change their mind or plans when things aren't working out or when it's time to switch to plan B. They don't just double down or stubbornly refuse to reconsider things. So if you're flexible enough, then you have that ability of mind to change course and correct course. But also, it means being able to listen to other people's opinions and hear them out and take them seriously without just dismissing them completely. Okay, so next we've got open-minded skepticism, another quality of a good critical thinker. What is that? It's the kind of person who's skeptical but also open-minded. So in a way, there's 2 points of emphasis. The skeptical part is that you wouldn't believe stuff that has been told to you that you hear unless it can be proven with good reasonable evidence. So a skeptical individual is willing to believe things, but they need evidence. Otherwise, they would say, I don't know, it's still something that hasn't been shown. So a skeptical person says, only believe what's demonstrated through evidence, but also keeping an open mind to all sides, unless and until this evidence or proof emerges. So if you're an open-minded skeptic, you're open-minded enough to hear all the different viewpoints and consider them, but you're skeptical enough to not go with any of them unless and until there's sufficient evidence to back it or prove it. Okay, now here, along the same lines, when people mention or talk about skepticism, there's often some reference to the philosopher René Descartes. Descartes, in his classic work, The Meditations, he talks about what's called the method of doubt. And we briefly discussed it in the class meetings here too, and it's also in our book. So let me ask you then for a little input. If you could remember or tell me anything, what is the method of doubt? So I can give you some hints, but I still want you to tell me. The method of doubt, he says, is something that you could do to try and figure out what's totally certain. Because according to Descartes, it's very important to find out what is certain, because he thought that's what we need to have as a foundation for science and these higher realms of human knowledge. Okay, good. So right, Devin, and also Jonah. With the method of doubt, a person assumes to be false anything and everything that could even possibly be doubted. Very, very far-reaching skepticism. So even if there's some wild, outlandish possibility that something's not true, in the method of doubt, you would go ahead and just assume that it isn't true, and you'd continue on in the same way until you discover something that could never be doubted, and then you would have your foundation of certainty. In the method of doubt that Descartes talks about in his book, he really goes to extremes with it. He says you can't really be sure that even right now you're not dreaming, or you can't be sure that the whole world around you is not just some type of simulation or whatever. Well, anyway, I don't think that we're going to go as far as that with our doubts, but it is a good thing to have a healthy dose of skepticism in your life, because otherwise you have a big problem, which is you're too credulous. That's kind of like a close cousin to being gullible, the sort of person that just believes things that they hear without investigating further. And in many cases, the credulous person doesn't have the ability to face uncomfortable truths. They just want to believe whatever this thing sounds good or whatever they think is interesting. So let's have a willingness to exhibit skepticism in some cases. If we have enough evidence to overcome those doubts, then that's something that's probably better for you to consider true. Okay, so then collaborative learning is another quality of a good critical thinker. That's just the ability to work well with other people to come up with and find shared solutions to common problems that people share. So instead of just doing everything by yourself and refusing the input or the advice of others, taking people's viewpoints on board and trying to, again, work cooperatively instead of alienating others and pushing them aside, work together with people to find shared solutions to common problems. That's collaborative learning. And then one more of these qualities that's discussed was creative problem solving. So with creative problem solving, I mean, the name is almost like self-explanatory, but there is a little discussion that we had. And so it's the ability to come up with complex and creative solutions to complex problems. So in some cases, that means that you anticipate in advance what problems could happen, and you're prepared already with certain plans in case those things do occur. In other cases, it's the ability to quickly assess a situation and to take the kind of action that's going to find a solution to whatever you're facing in that moment. So good critical thinkers don't just freeze or their mind doesn't just become blank when it's time to solve a problem or take an action. They're already thinking about the right actions to take, the strategies to solve whatever the issue is, and in some cases, they have already available contingency plans ready. Okay, so next question. Why is it important to be a good critical thinker in order to be a good citizen in a democracy, in this kind of form of government that we live in? Oh, not to worry, Paul, good to see you. Better late than never. As you know, we're just going over the study guide, so you can just jump in, and we're going through the notes of chapter 1. The question I was talking about is, why is it good to be a good critical thinker as a citizen in a democracy? Well, in democracy, the core function of democracy that makes it that type of system is elections and democratic elections and voting. So citizens essentially are the body that determines the composition of the government and the outcome of our legislation. So we ultimately do wield power as voters to appoint people to these high offices. And if we're going to make all the decisions about the composition of the government, and by extension the laws that we'll live by, then we have to be able to cast wise votes that are based on correct information and wise appreciation of the arguments that we're being entertained with by these politicians and other referenda that come up before the voters. So essentially, we can only be very good voters if we're wise to the facts and if we can compare the arguments carefully. Critical thinkers are good and skilled at both making arguments and evaluating them. So wouldn't that be a good skill for a voter, a citizen in a democracy, a person capable of participating in the system of government on the basis of the right information? Okay, so there we go. Democracy is all about voting, and good critical thinkers are going to make more wise choices, I think. And that's something mentioned in the book. Okay, so number 7, how could critical thinking benefit a person in terms of making a rational life plan and their own self-esteem? Well, okay, so being a good critical thinker equips you with certain mental skills that give you a lot of advantages in life. One of them is that it makes you better at planning things. If you have goals in life, then the only way you'll ever achieve them is to make suitable plans that you can then successfully pursue and accomplish. But if you're a good critical thinker, then you know what the steps are going to be towards these big ambitious goals you may have, and what the right method would be to attain all the little subordinate steps along the way. So good critical thinkers assign reasonable goals, they know the steps to their achievement, and they also can consider their own talents and abilities in determining what best methods to take to get to those goals. Also, good critical thinking has shown some scientific evidence anyway that it makes you less prone to rage, depression, and higher reported degree of self-esteem. So, I mean, I guess that's probably because good critical thinkers are a little bit more self-sufficient and capable of solving problems and not easily overwhelmed by the challenges and obstacles that people face in life. So those kind of abilities make you feel a little bit more at ease and comfortable as you go through all the difficult and sometimes pleasant parts of life, but we got to deal with both sides. Okay, so continuing from there to number 8, the 3 levels of critical thinking. So let's ask about those points. Experience, interpretation, and analysis. According to our textbook, we can roughly look at these as the 3 steps in the critical thinking process. But who could tell me about any of those steps? So first off, what's the experience stage of critical thinking? Can we say what that is? The first step. So we're starting off critical thinking with the experience stage, and what is that all about to begin with? Okay, you say gathering sensory information, Matteo. That's one way to put it, very philosophically stated. I like that. In the more broad sense, because sometimes it's not something that you directly sensed or perceived. Sometimes it may be just an event in the world that you're kind of analyzing. Like you could say, oh, Donald Trump won the 2016 election, and that's just what happened. Or it could be a personal event, like you got into the college of your choice, or you didn't get into the college of your choice, whatever the case may be. It could be something that's related to your own life and events, or it could be something that just is an event in the world. But right, Devin, the experience stage, though, is just describing what the experience was before you go on to the next step and try and explain why or how it happened. So we got to start somewhere, and the first step is just describing the event itself. The second stage is interpretation. And now when we get to that interpretation stage, this is the point where we're trying to actually give the explanation for the first time. Why did that happen, or what caused that to happen? Okay, so if it's something in your personal life, you look back and you try and assess the factors that might have caused that outcome. Something that happened in the world, you might look at the larger social circumstances, etc., or historical forces that you think led to some event happening in the world. Because we want to know why things happen as critical thinkers. We don't just want stuff to happen and then we're like living with the consequences and results. We want to be able to control things. So if we like things that have happened, we want to be able to make them replicate. If we don't like things that have happened, we want to avoid that and try and do better and make sure it doesn't happen again. But if you don't even know why it happened, then you're not in a position to achieve either outcome. Okay, so then what's the last step of analysis? Does anyone have a sense about that? So what I said so far is, experience, what it was, what happened. Interpretation, why though, and how, explain. Now we get to analysis, and what is that? So just let's get that one out there if we can. What's the analysis step, the final step? Okay, good. So Jonah, you consider whether the previous interpretation was correct or not. That's right. So that's the step where you take a final look at whatever the interpretation of the event is, and you ask yourself, did I get it right? Or do I think maybe that there's a different interpretation that's better suited to explain these facts? The reason that we add that last stage is because sometimes a person's initial interpretation is a little bit clouded by, I don't know, in some cases, emotion or bias or the heat of the moment. But when we return to the situation later in our mind and we think it over again, oftentimes we have more information to judge the case based on. In some circumstances, we've calmed down and we're more impartial and rational as we think about the circumstances. So anyway, you have to go back and look at it again and determine, did I have the right explanation or not? Sometimes you'll revisit the thoughts and you will change your view about what the real explanation was. Okay, so critical thinking goes in those steps. Experience, interpretation, and analysis. Same argument for a waiting period on gun purchases. Well, it's an interesting point that you raised there, Paul. Yeah, you could say that a person has determined that they have some need for this weapon, and maybe because they're being forced under some legislation and some laws, depending on the state, to take a time period as, to wait, then maybe that causes the person to reconsider why they thought they needed it or whether they really did, and then they might have changed their decision. So we want to make sure their final decision is one that they have thoroughly considered. Okay, good point. So let's continue on from there. Next stuff has to do with the obstacles to critical thinking. And so we talked about benefits just a moment ago, and there's also a list of various barriers or obstacles to critical thinking. So things that get in the way or stand in the way of us doing our critical thinking better and more effectively. Psychological defense mechanisms that we all sometimes develop, tendencies that we have, which take us away from the good critical thinkers that we want to be. So what are some of these barriers or obstacles? One is avoidance. That is, as the word, I guess, pretty much means, to avoid people or information that conflicts with whatever you already believe. Now, I think of avoidance and confirmation bias as kind of like two definitions for one concept in a way. They're two sides of the same coin, if you will. With confirmation bias, you kind of only seek information that is supportive of what you think. With avoidance, it's like deliberately avoiding those sources of information or people who would conflict with your views. So they're kind of very similar. One is in the pursuit of information, and one is trying to avoid contrary information. But it's better for you to just take on views and information from all sources. In the end, you're the judge, and you're the one that's going to make the determination whether you thought it was reasonable or not. But people can't be hurt by information, even if it's stuff that you don't find favor with. And it'll expand your viewpoint. It'll at least let you know how people think, even if you don't end up agreeing. So then there's anger, another barrier. Anger, as you can understand, is just having this emotionally hostile reaction to someone presenting you with contrary views or ideas. Why get mad, though? You know, if you don't like what they're saying, if you fundamentally disagree with it, a better reaction would be to somehow patiently and calmly explain why the argument fails, why the evidence is not sufficient for their conclusion, or why they're just misjudging the facts. But by the time you're getting angry, yelling at someone, calling them names, or even worse, we've gone off the rails of having a logical discussion of evidence, and that's not what good critical thinkers would want to do. And by the way, it doesn't really, in my opinion, I don't think, and in most others, advance any kind of credibility behind the person that's getting mad. Because if you're getting that mad, it makes it seem more like you actually have lost track of evidence and reasons to support your view, because you could state those calmly and confidently if you had them. Okay, so then there's cliche. Cliche are these overused common phrases. Oftentimes they're little one-liners that have become popular. And what they do on many occasions is to stop critical discussion or debate from going forward further. So like people are reaching the end of the line in their exchange of views, and someone just says, let's agree to disagree, or it is what it is, or to each his own. And you know those kind of phrases when people say, that's the way the cookie crumbles, that's life, c'est la vie. You know, these are phrases that basically tell a person, let's stop, let's not go on with this. And I guess in some cases that's fair, but I find, and the book kind of mentions too, that this becomes a second nature, a bad habit. People overuse these cliches, and we end up talking to each other in cliches after a while without ever going beneath the surface level of evaluating our ideas. Okay, another obstacle, another barrier to critical thinking, denial. So that is simply, you know, when you flat out deny alternative views before you even consider whether they're true or false. It's not quite exactly the same as avoidance, because to deny it, you have to gain exposure to it. But, you know, it's like a person who can't even consider the possibility that an opposed view is true. You know, you've heard of people like flat earthers or climate change deniers, or, you know, the list goes on. So plug in your favorite example. Okay, ignorance. Ignorance, as described in our book, it refers to willful ignorance, like ignorance that you basically choose, but you don't need to have. So like, it is, in other words, when you deliberately choose to stay uninformed about some topic so that you don't have to take any position on it or to take any kind of action with respect to it. You know, there's all kinds of big debates, and policy debates, moral debates, you know, everything, everyday things in practical life. And sometimes people will profess ignorance, and they'll say, well, I can't weigh in because I just don't know anything about it. Sometimes that's okay because maybe the information is too far beyond the average common person's knowledge. But in many other cases, a person professes ignorance even though the information that could make them informed is ready at hand and available for anyone, maybe just a couple clicks away. So if a person doesn't vote, for example, and it's because they haven't read the literature that they make available to the public on either side of the, you know, debated proposition, then that's not really in bounds for them to say, oh, I'm just ignorant of the facts. They should inform themselves, after all, right? So let's try and make sure we take opportunities to become more well-informed on things instead of passing them up and then making that a weak basis for an excuse to just not do anything or think anything later. Okay, conformity. That's when you just adopt a viewpoint that you think is popular or that is held by the majority, whatever. And why would one do that? Just because they want to fit in and they don't want to stand out from the crowd or from the norm. So yeah, you should think about things on your own independently. Whether you end up agreeing with the majority view or not, it's your opinion and it's your judgment that you should, you know, stand on. So be willing to deviate and depart from the popular or the majoritarian views. In some cases, they're well justified and perfectly fine. But in other cases, people find themselves following them just to fit in. And if that's the case, then they just become a conformist with no real intellectual principle behind the thing they believe, other than wanting to be, in the in crowd. Okay, so then they're struggling. One more of these barriers. That is when a person endlessly debates which action or position to take, but then they never really come to a conclusion in the end. So it's just like a never-ending struggle to come up with the view, but not reaching a conclusion. So in the end, you want to reach a conclusion, whether it's about, something that you're hearing in media, or it's a political issue, or it's a moral debate. You want to have your views. Otherwise, you just spend a lot of time thinking about things, and you never ever have anything to say to someone if they ask you, what is your position? A lot of these things are difficult matters and takes time, in some cases a long time, for someone to fully set forth their own worldview and their belief system. But you want to develop that. That's a big part of just becoming a fully well-realized person. And so it doesn't mean that your views are never subject to change, but you do want to try and assign some beliefs to yourself. Okay. Now, going on, there's just a few more questions that fall into the chapter 1 notes. So there's stuff about narrow-mindedness and forms of it. That was like a sort of subcategory of this obstacles to critical thinking material. So they described absolutism, egocentrism, ethnocentrism, and anthropocentrism. Okay, so first off, absolutism is just the broad concept of not being able to stand up to a perceived authority figure and just believing that whatever they say or do is absolutely correct. It can't be challenged. So, when you think about people who are completely tied to some worldview and they would never be able to challenge those that they perceive to be as like authority figures who are also supportive of it, then that might be a good example. So you always want to think for yourself, be an independent thinker. Sometimes authority figures can be wrong. In some cases, you're going to become one of those authority figures, and then you're going to be a peer with whoever it might be that maybe expresses a different view from you. So just know that there's always room for rational criticism, even of authority figures. Now, egocentrism, that is the belief that you're better and smarter than everybody and the world revolves around you. So if you're an egocentric type of person, then no, I'll leave you guys to debate that issue on your own. I don't want to get into the weeds of that kind of policy debate, at least not with you two guys at the moment. But it is an interesting debate. In my own life, I have some pretty avid firearm enthusiasts that I even grew up in the household of my uncle, and he has a very big arsenal of weapons. That he's a collector of those weapons. So he was always like a big Second Amendment type of advocate and stuff. But in my own mind, I feel like he collects these weapons, but it's not like he really uses them, and they just sort of sit up in an attic. Sometimes when you see the number of weapons that are used to commit deadly acts, you worry about access to the weapons more than the liberty to possess them unfettered. So there is that debate about what the proper interpretation of the Second Amendment is in the Constitution, where it says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free nation or something, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be abridged. It's been interpreted by the Supreme Court to have the implication of an individual right to bear arms rather than like a well-regulated militia, which is what some that are in more favor of greater restrictions and regulations interpret that argument to mean. But anyway, there are reasonable arguments on both sides. And so I think that in that case, as with many of the others here, you really just have to dig into the selected material and literature on that and sort of come up with your own views. First gun you shot was a .22 carbine machine gun when you were 7. That's pretty young. For me, I went out and shot, some some long guns and some handguns and stuff in teenage years with my family, but I'm no longer a gun owner, and I don't know. I have a mixture of views on that. It's something in the news, of course, as we see tragic events happen. Certainly we don't want those things to happen anymore, so whatever could happen to prevent them, that would be nice. Anyway, so let's move on. I don't want to spend too much time away from the review, but these are interesting topical debates, which are part of the substance of being a good critical thinker. So let's continue, though. What I said was egocentrism. If you just have an egotistical sense of things, you think you're better than other people, you don't take their views seriously when they disagree with you. That's no way to live, that's no way to act. It puts you at a disadvantage. As much as you may feel superior and self-assured while you project your ego to others, you're easily manipulated through flattery in that case, and you are also going to be a person with an irrational, inflated assessment of yourself. So that's going to put you in a state of overconfidence in many cases where being more cautious and measured would have been to your advantage. So anyway, let's not do that. Ethnocentrism, that is the unjustified belief in the superiority of a person's race or group or culture. So if you think of like religious extremism or supremacism within racial thinking, this would all kind of fit the description. We have to know that as human beings, we have differences, but we're fundamentally humans nonetheless. And so there's no reason for us to think that it's only members of our self-identified group, whether that's racial, religious, or cultural or national, that we're the only people that are important or that have value or whatever. Clearly false, clearly unscientific. Sad to say that people still think this way sometimes, but I believe that we've made big progress nonetheless. Anyway, anthropocentrism. That's the view that humanity is the only thing that matters, and nature and the other animals are not so important and they don't matter too much. I would not necessarily place that on a par with, bigotry and sexism and everything else. But it is reasonable to say that if we don't have at least some healthy respect for the natural environment that we find ourselves in, that we could undermine it and harm our own best interests as humans. So we have to have at least some kind of concern for the sustainability and maintenance of our natural environment. How can people be so passionate about being discriminatory to a race or religion? It's hard for me to assess. I have my own views about that. I think it has to do with a sense of identity that people strive for, and there are fundamental human drives and imperatives that incline us towards group identity. But yeah, why is it so pernicious in some ways of being expressed? I think you have to go into history and look at historical patterns coupled with human psychology. So there's a mixture of studies, I think, that would give you some answers, but maybe that's a little outside of my range as a pure philosopher, but I have thoughts. Anyways, though, let's continue. The last question from that chapter 1 talks about these two things, rationalization and doublethink. So rationalization, so Jonah, you're making an interesting point. I've only heard, you hear about such cases like some like Hispanic members and stuff of like, I don't know, white supremacist groups. Hard for me to understand really any such persons. It would be in a way like self-hate, to believe in a racial hierarchy in which you are not one of the favored members. So I don't know. I believe that that's just kind of like appropriating and adopting the viewpoint of the oppressor class or whatever, if that's what we would say it is. But I don't think that's a very widespread thought. So anyway, yeah, so these are all very good and fair points, but I did want to speak the last few things on this rationalization and doublethink stuff. So rationalization, that's when you try to make rational something that was not done with any rational basis. So you do something impulsively without critical thought, perhaps even something that's subject to moral criticism by others. And then later on, when you're called to account, why did you do that? The person invents a ex post facto, meaning after the fact, justification that was not present at the beginning. Like, for example, saying, oh, it's not what you meant, Jonah, so maybe the question, does the same go for people, for when people say the white race is superior, even if they aren't white? Well, you have to reword it then, because now I'm losing track of what your question might have been, but it's okay. Let me just finish my thought, though, on this rationalization stuff. Suppose that I bought like a very expensive pair of shoes or whatever, and I already have a lot of shoes, so I didn't really need them, but I just thought they looked super cool, and, I had to have them, so I bought it. Now, later on, someone's telling me, don't you need some extra money right now for this other thing that was actually important? So how could you justify spending it on those shoes? Now I tell the person, oh, I don't know. Yeah, because the resale value on these shoes is really high. They're so hard to get that I could easily sell them back on the market and make twice what I spent. So it's really a wise investment. I'm in the resale game. Now the person might be just saying that so it doesn't sound like they're willing to waste money on unnecessary expenses. And now it sounds like that's a sweet, smart, wise investment strategy. But it was really not done on that basis. So in many cases, we want to make ourselves seem smarter, more rational, more deliberate than we really were. And that's when we engage in rationalization. So it's better to have the reasons up front in the beginning and not have to cover yourself up later by making up reasons that were not present in the beginning. Okay? Yeah. Cool. Double think, one more. That's believing two opposite things at the same time. This is a word that we borrowed from George Orwell's 1984 novel, in which the big brother government kind of locks down and controls whatever everyone's doing. In the book, they think that they can keep people in a perpetual state of complacency and not able to organize effectively and overthrow the big brother if they have contradictory beliefs populating their head. But in everyday life, we use this as a phrase to refer to when people have contradictions and confusions in their own thought. So like maybe a person says, I believe that race is something that should be favored equally, like no one should be discriminated against on the basis of their race. But at the same time, I don't really like having all these people of a certain race in my own community. How is that consistent for a person to say we're all equal and we should all be treated equally, but at the same time, I don't want to necessarily live with certain people nearby me? I don't know. I'm giving you one example. I'm sure you can think of many others. Maybe a person says that they don't like the ostentatious display of wealth because they think that's tacky and a little bit, I don't know, egotistical, but then at the same time, they do like to have really nice things and post them on social media themselves. Double think. It's kind of having double standards in a way, saying one thing and then also at another time saying the opposite, but wanting to have it both ways. So sometimes in life, we got to make choices. We have to declutter our mental inventory of thoughts, because sometimes we have thoughts knocking around in there that don't match, that are opposites even. And unless we drop one or the other, we end up having a confused and incoherent belief system. Okay? So anyway, yeah. Let's go forward. We got 3 and 4. So chapter 4, that's the one that we really recently finished last week. So if we don't get to cover all the topics in it with the time allotted today, I think we probably can. But if we don't, you certainly have a lot of material and notes that have recently been taken on it. But we'll continue going through these as much as we can. So chapter 3 is all about language and communication. Okay? So obviously the first question from that chapter was the definition of language. What definition was offered in our book? So what is language then? If we could sort of summarize the idea. Language, like I'm using it now. And if you're typing something, you're using it too. So, but what is it though? What is that thing that you're using? Okay, so language. We use it to communicate feelings, attitudes, or emotions. And no, sorry, Devin. Can't go with that. So strike that, because what you're describing there, Devin, is actually the concept of expressive language. But that holds to the next number in the list. So good, Devin, now you got it. A system of communication which involves a set of symbols that can be either spoken, written, or nonverbal. Now there we have it, that's right. So in language, we communicate. If I want you to understand something or think of something, I'm gonna say it to you. So if I'm telling you right now, think of a taxi cab, boom, it's in your head, you're thinking of it, I don't know. Or maybe you don't even remember taxi cabs because this is a generation of Uber and Lyft. Well, they're these yellow looking vehicles, with sometimes black stripes on them. So you have to actually get a license to be a taxi cab driver. Anyway, the thing is, if I want you to think of that, I can just say the words, or I could write them down. Now, there's no animal on the whole planet where I could say, hey, I want you to think of this particular thing, and then they think of it because I'm saying it. I mean, maybe I could make the dog think of food or something by being like treats, but in the larger scope of being a human being, we have a full range vocabulary with all kinds of concepts and abstract ideas. So that's important to being human, the ability to convey facts and information from one to another, to hear it or receive it, or to speak it or write it to others. So, the TV show a couple weeks ago, nice. Yeah, well, not the movie. Okay, I thought you were talking about the classic with Robert De Niro, Taxi Driver. Never mind, different example. But anyway, yeah. So I just gave the taxi example as a random thing. I could tell you think about the moon, and you'll think about the moon. So with language, sometimes it's auditory. You hear it because you can hear my voice. Sometimes it's visual. You can see it because it's inscribed through symbols that are written. And in other cases, it's nonverbal through the use of hand gestures or tone of voice or whatever, body language or even sign language. Okay, cool. So then explain different functions of language. We have informative, directive, expressive, ceremonial. So just a brief word about each of those. The informative function of language is probably the most primary. It's whenever you use language to simply convey claims that are either true or false. So that is to use assertoric sentences pretty much. That type of language use is important because that's the only type of language that's used within arguments as premises or conclusions. So if I say, for example, that the moon orbits the Earth, that's just correct information, and that's an informative use of language. If I say that the Earth orbits the sun, that's also true. If I say the sun orbits the Earth, that's false, but it's information, it's just false information. Okay, now, directive language is when we use imperatives to direct or to influence people's behavior or actions. So it's basically commanding, using language in order to issue commands. Get on the ground, drop the weapon, run up that hill, come back, wait. You know, in whatever case I'm directing someone's action or behavior, I'm using directive language, another main function of speech or writing. Sometimes you see directive language written on posted signs, like stop. So anyway, another example. Okay, so then expressive language, and that's something that you mentioned before, Devin. It's when one uses language to communicate feelings, attitudes, or emotions, or to bring about an emotional impact. So like song lyrics, verse, poetry, and things of that kind. I would almost think speaking in tongues and stuff, you know, the way people do that sometimes, and like they feel like they're having like religious ecstasy or whatever. But in a way, I don't know if I can include that, because when people speak in tongues, they don't actually say real words. They just kind of make noises and stuff. But, you know, maybe it's in the ballpark. And then finally, we've got ceremonial language, which would be language used in official, formal type settings. And this is usually language that's set down by means of rules that are long-standing and understood by all the participants to the setting or scenario. So like wedding vows, court proceedings, maybe constitutional proceedings, oaths of office, and all of that. You know, it's kind of funny, I'm a constitutional officer. It's just a small fact, but when you get a job at Cal State, where I also work, California State University, since it's a government job and you're an employee of the state of California, you know, Betty Yee, or Treasury Secretary of California, issues the check. We all have to declare that we will defend the United States Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So I guess to take that vow seriously, I have to be a person that cares about our Constitution for sure, which I do, so it's good. But anyway, let's move ahead. Different types of meaning. So denotative meaning. Denotative meaning is the meaning that's given associated to a word when you think about its official, like, dictionary definition. So it just expresses the essential attributes of whatever the thing is, like the dictionary would do. Importantly, it's not like slang meaning, or it's not derived from personal associations or experiences. So just like the official meaning of something. Wait, what? No, this is not the case. No, you really can't say that, no. I just said the exact opposite. So if you were listening, you'd know that that's not correct. But anyway, that's denotative meaning, guys. So like if you think of the word dog as opposed to its slang meaning when you're talking about your friends or when you're trying to insult somebody, the official meaning is like a certain type of mammal species, a canine. And then connotative meaning. So connotative meaning is the meaning of a word that is based on past experience and associations. And due to that, it can be either positive or negative in force. So take, for example, the slang meaning of dog, which trades on the associations of friendship and loyalty that dogs sometimes are associated with. That might then lead to the positive connotation when it's used as a term of art for friendship. Okay, yeah, so we can continue from there. Thanks, I'm glad that I can at least provide a little bit of humor to your day. If I can make at least one young person, or of any age, I guess, laugh, I feel like I've done something positive. So anyway, continue. What is a stipulative definition? A stipulative definition is a definition that's given to a new term that appears in the language. In language, words are constantly being added, some deleted. One thing that's kind of funny, I was seeing doom scrolling is added to the lexicon, I guess, this last year. You know, it's like a COVID word. I don't know if you guys are aware. It's kind of like when you're on your social media feeds, Twitter, I don't know, Facebook or whatever, and you're just scrolling and you're looking at bad news all around, kind of like an apocalyptic, maybe a little bit nihilistic term. But I'm just giving you that as one example. When new terms emerge in language, we have to coin them, and we have to add that definition and concept to the vocabulary. So that's just one example, but many others could be given, having to do with new forms of technology, new forms of social practices or conventions. Yeah, all I watch is the news. So we're total opposites, Noah. It's just, for me, news and sports, and that's it. And then Netflix and stuff sometimes at the end of the day, just for fun. But I'm an avid consumer of the news. I can't get enough. I mean, I literally just, I need to have a constant update on the news. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of crazy stuff that's popping off, but if you don't pay attention to it, that's also problematic. So it's like you kind of can't win. If you pay attention to it, it's a little sad. If you ignore it, well, then you're not that informed. So I don't know. They say ignorance is bliss, but I don't really agree. I think ignorance is sad. R.I.P. LeBron. Oh, geez, come on, Noah. I know you're kidding, but that's funny. Okay, so let's continue then to the next thing. Theoretical definitions. These are definitions that are given to scientific terms, so that's easy, just, science words. Well, I mean, the Lakers are the champions, and LeBron, I mean, this is just logic and it's just objective, but he's definitely the best basketball player that has ever played the game. So if we can recognize a couple of essential truths, not just playing, but honestly, yeah, he's great. So I'm a big fan of LeBron and the Lakers. But we continue from here. Theoretical definitions, science definitions. What's an operational definition? An operational definition is a definition that's given in order to create a standard that we can all use uniformly. So it often involves the establishment of a threshold or a boundary above or below which the term does or does not apply. So for example, the definition of obese medically has to do with the value that you have on the BMI scale. Above a certain threshold value, we say that's classified as defined being obese, and below it, not. The age of adulthood, 18 years. The amount of blood alcohol concentration that a person can have before the law says that they're driving under the influence. So these would all be operationally defined concepts. Poverty, whether your income is above or below the set threshold of the poverty line. Okay. Persuasive definitions. Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about the Lakers, just last thing, I mean, he is out for the count and it sucks. But we've got Anthony Davis coming back soon, and we're still, I think, number 3 in the West Coast standings. So I think hope springs eternal. But back to what I was saying, a persuasive definition is when you have a definition that tries to influence another person to accept your point of view on a topic. So it's usually not a neutral, normal definition. It's a skewed one that reflects your own personal views. Like if you defined capitalism as theft, or if you defined taxation as theft, either of those would be trying to persuade the audience that hears you of your view, which is that the thing is bad or whatever. It's not a normal way to define something. Like if a person defined abortion as like, the hideous murder of a child or something, well, they're trying to persuade you that you should never be supportive of it. But a more neutral definition that doesn't import all these attitudes would at least give someone their own ability to make their judgments about it. Okay, so next. Okay, good to know. Thanks, Noah. But I got more for you. Okay. 5 criteria for evaluating a definition. Let me hear some of you tell me about that. So if you're looking at a definition and your question is this a good one or not? What are certain features that you do see in a so-called good definition? So we talked about 5 of these qualities. I'd like to see some of you guys report them back to me here. So what are some of those qualities of a good definition? Yeah, you'll give me them, but let's just get them out there. It's a question you do have to answer. So different qualities of a good definition. It should be blank, 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 blank. Like, what should it be like? Go ahead and tell me. All the stuff, it's all from our notes. It's all from the book. So we know we have the information at hand if we just go and find it. So what is the answer? Criteria, qualities for a good definition. take your time. I mean, I guess, whatever, but, you know, eventually say something. Okay, good. That's one thing. True, Jonah. So a good definition should not be circular. Now, also should avoid emotional language. Good. Devin, you're adding to that. Should not be too broad nor too narrow. Should avoid overly technical and obscure language. And yeah, state all the essential attributes. So those are the 5 divided between the different student responses here. So neither too broad nor too narrow. States all the essential attributes. Not circular. Avoids overly technical and obscure language, and it avoids emotional language. So a point of discussion about each. Neither too broad nor too narrow. A good definition is not going to be stated in such broad terms that it includes more things than the word would really refer to. Okay. Also, a good definition should not be so narrow that it includes fewer things than the word should actually refer to. So if I define to you dog as an animal, that's too broad because it doesn't narrow it down enough to what kind of animal. If I say dog is a Cocker Spaniel, that's a little too narrow because this is just one subcategory of what things are dogs. Okay, so a good definition is going to hit right in that middle ground. It's not going to be stated in a way that includes more stuff than the word really refers to, nor less. That's what it means to be neither too broad nor too narrow. Also, it should state all the essential attributes. I gave you guys the example of like the geometric square because I wanted to see if we could test your ability to give me all the essential features. And just saying 4 sides is not enough because it does have 4 sides, but that's not all there is to it. It has to have equally linked sides. They have to be interior angles that are right angle, 90-degree angles. So anyway, a good definition doesn't miss or leave out any of the important essential facts about the thing. Third, it should not be circular. So you cannot have the word appear in its own definition. Like if you know, you ask somebody what is a doctor, and they say a doctor is it's a person that's a doctor. This is not helpful because they haven't defined the word except to repeat it. So you have to give the definition in other words, building a bridge from understood concepts to the presumably not understood yet definition of this word. Okay, and then also a good definition should not include emotional language unless you're defining an emotional concept, like what is sadness or something. But for the most part, you don't want to have to tell somebody what the thing is in terms of how to feel about it, whether it's amazing, terrible, awesome, horrible. You know, those are words that refer to a person's feelings about whatever the thing is that's being defined, which is a separate question as to what the thing is itself. Okay. And finally, a good definition should not overwhelm a person with technical terms that they don't understand. So, like if you're a specialist in something, then maybe you have access to shop talk about it and jargon about it that other people don't really know. But you can't define it in those words because then the person still won't understand what it means. We gave this example from the book of like people who are net specialists that work with netting as their chosen career. And if you ask that person what a net is and they start to hit you with like, okay, well, it's anything decussated with interstices between each interval. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's what it is, but it doesn't quite make sense to a person that's not so well informed about all those little words. So just make sure to apply the definition to your audience in a way they understand. Paul, you say, ask me about computers. Ha, I can understand, right? So you probably just start telling us all this technical stuff. Even if I asked you a basic question like, what's a hard drive? And then you're going to tell me, oh, the hard drive is actually, you know, one of the processing channels of the da-da-da-da-da, and then other words that I don't know. That, I think, could also be frustrating if you're dealing with, like, people in the medical profession. You know, they give you a diagnosis. You're like, okay, well, what exactly is spina bifida? And they're like, okay, well, spina bifida is when the da-da-da-da-da. I mean, I can't even come up with these words, you know. But I used to watch Star Trek sometimes as a kid, and they had a lot of that, you know, because they're just working with fake future technology, so they can constantly talk about it in terms that no viewer could ever understand. In that case, though, it's innocent because we don't need information about a fictional scenario, but in real life, we want to be well informed about what things mean. Okay. It is a constant issue to be aware of and know what level is appropriate. Yeah, it's true. I mean, as a philosopher, I could, you know, when I'm talking to fellow philosophers that are other, like, you know, degree-holding professors, PhDs and stuff, we really get into the jargon, you know, okay, well, do you think it's a priori that, you know, concept of logical necessity exists, or do you think that that's something that's based on a posteriori insights? And another philosopher will be like, oh, well, I mean, if it's a priori, then what? Does it come from Plato's forms, or does it come from God? And we could have a discussion like this, but for some of you guys, you're going to be like, you lost me once you said a priori right away. But anyway, just so that you know that we're on the topic, a priori means prior to experience. Some people think we know things about math and things like that without having to have any physical experience. So that's kind of about rationalism. We talked about rationalism and empiricism before. Okay, but anyway, Star Wars is just nonsense internally. That's funny. So Star Trek made a better effort, at least, to be internally consistent with the use of their jargon. Pretty cool. Okay, so a little bit more here, guys, just to finish this chapter 3 section of notes out. 5 different rhetorical devices. Haha, funny, Devin. Thanks. Thank you. I try my best. But 5 rhetorical devices. So we talked about those 5. What do you have for me about those rhetorical devices? Ways of using language to manipulate or shape a person's view. And we gave a couple of these. A couple of isms to start it off. And then there were a few other terms also. So who can remember any of that? Let me know. Take a moment. Rhetorical devices. Okay, good, Devin. You got euphemism. That's correct. That's one. And I can talk about that, I guess, as you're thinking of the others. So one type of rhetorical device is euphemism. And with euphemism, what is done is a person takes a word which may have a more negative or neutral impact or connotation, and then they replace it with a more positive sounding word to create approval toward it, to make it seem like it's better than it really is, basically. So like someone's listing their car for sale, and they don't describe it as old, but they call it classic, because classic sounds nice and old doesn't. But it's the same car, it's just language that is shaping a more positive attitude towards it. You know, we're hearing about the shooting and stuff yesterday, sad of course. And I've noticed that in debates over gun control and gun policy, the same kind of euphemism and dysphemism stuff can happen. So let me hold that, because I want to tell you about dysphemisms too. So dysphemism is the opposite of euphemism, where you have a word that, well, you replace a more positive or neutral word with a more negative sounding one to create disapproval towards that thing. So take the way that people on either side of this gun control debate talk about those weapons. Yesterday I was hearing one of the officers that responded, or actually one of the police chiefs in the division over there, you know, one of the fallen officers tragically got shot responding to the shooting. And they said, well, the shooter, we heard reports through the radio that he had a patrol rifle. And some people that were doing commentary in the media were asking one of their specialists in the panel, what does that mean? And patrol weapon, one person was misinformed and thought, oh, does that mean that he stole an officer's gun or whatever? And another person said, no, that's just somehow, that's lingo that a lot of officers use within the field, because the AR-15 is a type of weapon that a lot of them use on certain patrols. So calling it a patrol rifle is one way of referring to it. But of course, when people dislike this type of weapon, because I don't know if it's high impact velocity rounds and the way that it can be fed semi-automatically, so it's very lethal, right? So then people will call it an assault weapon. And I know that some people on the Second Amendment, you know, gun rights side of the debate will say, oh, don't call it an assault rifle, that's a dysphemism. You're trying to make the gun sound evil by using this terrible word. Call it a patrol rifle, or call it a long gun, or, you know, whatever. So I don't know, I'm just giving you one example that I thought was relevant to the current events. But this happens all across the board. You know, one person's label of like anti-choice is another person's pro-life, and one person's pro-choice is another person's anti-life. So, you know, shaping the viewpoint towards the view or the idea or the concept, whatever it is, with language. We see these, and sometimes we have to see through them, because it's a thinly veiled attempt to influence your perspective without appeal to argument. So if there's something bad about that gun or whatever, we would find that out by analyzing and studying what it's like, rather than just the label that's used to refer to it. But anyway, good little discussion there. So there's euphemism, there's dysphemism, there's also hyperbole, Hyperbole is just to exaggerate and overstate. So like it took forever for my professor to email me back. I was literally like waiting for literally forever. That's not literally true. That's a hyperbolic statement. Maybe that's an innocent little example, but sometimes we get in the habit of exaggerating things, and it starts to blur into like deception actually, right? We end up exaggerating facts about ourselves, about our work history, about our friends, about stories and things that we've done in the past. So we want to make sure to try our best to stick to the truth. There's no need to exaggerate. And there's also sarcasm. That's when you use this kind of characteristic ironic tone of voice to make fun or make light of something or to deflect critical analysis or discussion. So awesome move, man. Like when somebody does something that's like a painful personal failure, oh yeah, I would love to, pick you up at the airport. Yeah, that sounds an amazing Saturday morning routine. Like you don't want to pick them up, so you're kind of sarcastically talking about how fun it would be to do them that favor. So anyway, sarcasm is sometimes humorous, sometimes it's tongue-in-cheek, and that's fine. But when we do it too much, we become a little bit less serious, and we don't speak seriously. So there's a time and place, but we shouldn't do it all the time. Okay, there's also simply deception. And deception is to be dishonest, but there's two basic ways that this could be done. One is active deception, to say things that are false, to deliberately mislead. Another would be passive deception, which is withholding the truth so that people don't discover it. You could hide from your employer the fact that you got fired at a previous job, or you could lie to that employer on the application about a work history that you don't have. Either would be deceptive, but one would be the commission of a lie, whereas the other would be the omission of the truth. So you've got lies of commission and lies of omission, they sometimes say. And that kind of tracks the distinction between the active and passive deception. Okay, now finally we've got these 4 communication styles. That's the last topic from the Chapter 3 review. Who can tell me about or even if you can remember the names of those 4 styles of communication from our book that we talked about? There's nothing in the glass, so I'm drinking an empty glass. Let me, while you're giving me that fact, I'm gonna give myself water. I'll be right back. Okay, thank you, Mateo. So there's passive, there's aggressive, passive-aggressive, and what's the one other one? We have 3 out of 4, but we can't forget the other one. Who knows that other one? Assertive, that's good. Okay, yes. So just a few points about each of these terms. Aggressive communication is about only wanting to get your way no matter what. So wanting to get your way at all costs, even if that involves offending people, upsetting them, or destroying the relationships that you have with others. So, the aggressive type of person, they don't mind raising their voice, yelling at people, getting mean. As long as they get their way in the end, that's all they really do care about. Sometimes that has its place, but a lot of times I feel that it's a little bit too much. And if you care at all about having solid and stable relationships in life, then you kind of sometimes have to curb your aggressive tendencies, right? At the same time, though, it has its place once in a while, and you just have to be the judge. Now, there's passive. Passive is the opposite of that. Passive is the type of person who hates confrontation and conflict so much so that they'll usually back down very easily and quickly if there's any pushback. So the person hates confrontation and conflict, they avoid it at all costs, and they back down easily. So this is kind of like a pushover, the type of person that doesn't want to tell you what they want or they need if they think there's going to be any resistance from anyone. They'd rather just let it go if they thought that they would actually have to challenge someone or bring an issue to their attention. So passive people, I guess they don't upset too many people, right? They don't make people mad. It's not like they're offending everyone by being passive, usually. But at the same time, they don't have their needs addressed in many cases, and they set lower targets in negotiation with other people too. So passive people sometimes need to speak up for themselves a little more, be a little more assertive. How a person does that, I mean, it's it's tough for a person to reform their tendencies and the way that they have a tendency to act. But only if you know how you have a tendency to act can you make any attempt to alter that. Okay, and then there's passive aggressive. Passive aggressive is a blend of those other two I just mentioned. So like the aggressive person, this one wants to get their way. But like the passive person, they also don't want to just come out and say it honestly because they're a little too shy about it. So instead, what they'll do is use these indirect methods of manipulation to get their way without having to say it up front. So instead of just telling the person, look, can you please not park in my parking spot, because it's not okay and it's against the rules, like leaving trash and stuff all around their car, or making it difficult for them to gain entry to the car, so that they'll kind of get the message, but you didn't tell them directly what you wanted. So sometimes in life people do that. You don't like your neighbor's dog like doing his business on your lawn, but instead of telling him, you start letting your dog do his thing on their lawn, or you just shovel their dog's due back onto their own lawn or something like that. I mean, maybe they'll get the picture. Maybe you'll get your way without having to say it. So the passive-aggressive tactic will work out. But a lot of times people just double down on their bad behavior when they see that you're going to be passive-aggressive about responding to it. So I think a lot of times you have to take things head on and address them. But again, it depends on the circumstance in each case, and you're going to have to make those judgments. Finally, there's assertive, okay? So with an assertive person, it's a solid middle ground. It's the type of person that will say what they want or need, but they do it calmly and with confidence, and they know when to back off a little bit if they're going too far and if they're starting to undermine the relationship. So assertive people, I think, is the best of all worlds, because you're not coming at people in a hostile way that's going to destroy friendships, but at the same time, you're letting people know that they can't just walk all over you, or you're letting people know when there's something that you'd like them to take care of or that you need to have addressed. So what's wrong with that? I don't know. I think it's a good strategy, but for some reason, a lot of people don't find it comfortable to be assertive. I don't know what that is in life, but it's something that everyone respects, and I don't think that it's a problem. So it's to your best interest to try to be that way if you can. Okay. Now, in the last chapter that we studied before, we're taking our midterm next class, it was chapter 4, and that's all about knowledge and the limits of human knowledge. So, there's a lot of terms in that, but it's more recent material. So even though we are going to run out of time today, you can easily retrieve the information from your book, from the notes, from the lectures, or some combination of all three. So anyway, well, a few of them we can talk about. What is knowledge? Who can tell me that? What is that concept of knowledge? Sort of academic definition of it. Okay, good, Devin. It's information that we believe, and it's true, and also we have justification for it. Correct. So a knowledge is a state of justified true belief. Paul, fruit on the tree of life. Yeah, I always wondered why it says in Genesis that God told Adam and Eve not to eat of the fruit from the tree of life, but the serpent, of course, tempted Eve, as the scripture says. I've always thought it's so funny to me that this is the thing that man was being forewarned not to do, to eat literally apples from the tree of knowledge. You would have thought that that's not a bad thing, because knowledge is a good thing. But anyway, it seems to be something that's like a lurking anti-knowledge position in some of those scriptures. But anyway, yeah, it's knowledge is JTB. So JTB, justified true belief. Truth, when what a sentence says matches the facts of reality. Like me telling you I'm wearing a watch. True, I am. Belief, when you think that something is true. So when you, the individual, agree with whatever this claim is. So do you think I'm wearing a watch? Then you believe it, and I am. So you have a true belief there. Now, do you know I'm wearing a watch? Yes, because you also have the third piece, which is justification. Justification is having evidence or reasons to back your belief. So what is your evidence that I'm wearing a watch? Well, you could tell people I saw him wearing it when he was talking to me live on YouTube. So that's my evidence, direct experience, having seen it, or at least seen it mediated through the medium of the internet. So to know something, you have to think it's true. Obviously, if you don't think it's true, then even if other people know it, you don't know it. So like, the world is a sphere. But if a person doesn't think it is, then they don't know it's a sphere, because they refuse to believe that. So you have to, first of all, believe the true thing, but then it has to be true as well. You can't be like, you fill in the wrong answer on a test and you call that knowledge. That's not knowledge, because it's not correct information. So it has to be a belief. It also has to be true, and then you have to have that evidence. Otherwise, it is just a guess. And even if it's a true guess, there's a difference between guessing something and knowing it. If I guess right now that there's aliens in outer space, I don't actually know that. I might be correct, though, but I don't have the evidence that I would need to put myself in a position of knowledge. Okay, so if any of the conditions is not met, knowledge is not there. So you got to have all three. 1, 2 out of 3 is not enough. You need them all. Now, there are different views about where most knowledge comes from. If you go back in the history of philosophy, and still to the current day, we talk about this distinction between rationalism and empiricism. Rationalism, don't confuse it with rationalization. I've noticed in previous, sometimes tests and quizzes, I've asked that question and people give the answer for the other definition. Rationalism is like a belief or view about the world, and rationalization is an action of trying to make something seem reasonable that was done with no basis in reason. Rationalism within epistemology is the belief that most human knowledge comes from just pure ideas and abstract thought and reason. So like the knowledge that you have of the value of pi, or mathematical equations, algebra, trigonometry, geometry. That's the sort of stuff that rationalists say is like the primary source of human knowledge, because it's not based on the 5 senses. Empiricism, on the other hand, says that most human knowledge does come from the 5 senses and the things that we can perceive with them. So the 5 senses are sight, taste, touch, hearing, and smell. And if you think about the information that you have about everything around you that's based on those 5 senses, empiricists put that as the sort of primary source that we're taking our knowledge from. And I believe I said to you guys before when we first discussed it that although there are these 2 camps, really in my mind, they're both halfway correct. We've got a lot of knowledge from pure rational appreciation of concepts, and then we have a lot of knowledge from the 5 senses. So what's evidence? Evidence is something that could prove or disprove a claim. So it's the kind of stuff that you would need to supply to give justification for a conclusion. They are also somewhat synonymous with the idea of premises in an argument, because premises are the backing and the basis that supports the conclusion. So we can see that as evidence too. What are some basic primary sources of evidence? Well, you've got direct experience, perceiving things yourself. There's testimony, that's hearing from other people what happened. And then there's memory, which is being able to recall previously perceived or attested to information. And then there's inference, which is when you draw conclusions from related facts. So like the shooting, I guess, I mean, I'm using it as an example because it's fresh in my mind. A shooting that happened yesterday in Boulder, I wasn't there, so I can't say I know about it because I saw it, but there were eyewitnesses, and of course, in their case, how do they know it happened? Because they were there. Say that I just read reports about it on the media, and so I just read these accounts, eyewitness accounts and other reporters on the scene and the police officials that gave press conference briefings about it. Well, in that case, I might say I've learned because I've taken in the testimony that has been reported to me from those that have been there. Another possibility is that I'm watching video of the events and I see the events playing out in the video. And in that case, I mean, it is perception mediated through the form of the visual medium of the camera. Okay, so anyways, evidence can come to us from these different sources, and without evidence, we would have no reason to believe things. So we have to have these sources of evidence, otherwise our beliefs lack justification and they can never be knowledge. Yes, Amber, we are having the midterm on Thursday. And Devin, you have a question? What is that? Let me know. Because we are running low on time, so I want to make sure I get to all your questions if you still have a few. But at least now I've been able to cover the first 5 in the 4th chapter, and so there's only 13 remaining questions in that list. If you guys go back, you'll be able to find those too. But let me know, what is your question though? Devin and anyone else if others have some. Well, while you're formulating your question, let me just say some clear things about the midterm test. The test is going to be given in the same way as the quiz that you took a few weeks back. So there won't be a class meeting. There won't be a YouTube live session on Thursday. Instead, you're just going to be sent the test form at just before 12:45 p.m. And then you'll have until the end of the class period, 2:10, to return back your answers as an attached file to me by email. So that's how Thursday's meeting goes. There's just the exam, and then after that, you have spring break. And you have a good spring break, and we'll be back after that with the second half of the semester. So Devin, assuming you're following along in the midterm review, You said, what are some primary sources of evidence? For number 5, it says, what are some reliable sources of evidence? Yes, I was thinking that. So I use the term reliable with primary kind of interchangeably. So yes, those primary sources of evidence with certain exceptions are generally reliable. So the answer is yes. So yes, I'm referring to primary and reliable synonymously. Jonah, can someone or the professor explain the Ash experiment for me? Okay, so the Solomon Ash experiment is this social psychology experiment. It's mentioned at the tail end of chapter 4. So what happened here was there was a standard line. This is the standard line. And then there were 3 comparison lines over here. Now, if I ask you, which of the 3 comparison lines matches this one in length? Tell me what you would say. You have 3 options, A, B, or C. Question, which one matches this? It's C. Okay, good. All right, very good. I hope it's easy enough. I was trying to draw it in a way where that's clear. A is too long to be the one that matches. B is too short. C is exactly the right length, or approximately. Now, here's how the Ash experiment worked, okay? Yeah, 3 is fine, but there's also inference, Devin, if you wanted to add that as a 4th. False memory is unreliable, so not to worry about false memory, but regular memory that's not false is generally reliable. We've mentioned false memory just so that we know that although memories are like statistically reliable, they're not 100% in every case. And the cases where they're unreliable have a lot to do with traumatic and chaotic situations. Like, for example, people that were present to the shooting yesterday, some will report that they thought there were multiple shooters just because in the melee and the chaos of trying to escape an active shooter, people can think that they hear gunshots coming from multiple different locations, and they could be overwhelmed with fear and panic. So just as an example of the chaos of a situation producing information in the mind that's not true. Someone's true and false memory, well, we have to seek corroboration with other available sources of evidence. But sorry though, Devin, I want to get back to you, but I don't want to finish though what I was saying before to Jonah. Okay, so on this point, guys, Ash experiment. You told me that C is the correct length, and it does match, right? But here's how Ash set up his study. He took 6 people, and he took 5 of them, and he said, with you 5 guys, when I come to you, I want you to all give me the same wrong answer, but say it as though it's just the most obvious, clear thing ever. So this would be like telling the 4 or 5 guys, all give me the answer B. Now the 6th person, though, was not in on this coaching that happened before. And so that was the real naive subject that we were really testing to see, basically this. Will they go with the wrong answer given by the other 5, the unanimous wrong answer of the others, or will they give the correct answer, which is very clear just by looking at it? And in the end, fully 3/4, about 75% of the test subjects in the 6th person's role did give the same wrong answer as the other 5. So once again demonstrates the power of conformity and social pressure in the way we form our judgments. You might think, well, they knew it was C, and they just gave the wrong answer because they thought that they wanted to fit in. But many of them started to question their own powers of perception. Like some of them were like, well, how can these other people all be wrong? If I squint at it and I really look hard, maybe, yeah, I guess it's almost like an allude. I guess that is the one that matches, you see? So if you can be tricked into giving the wrong answer on a question that's so simple about visual identification of lines, then imagine how much more easy it is for someone to acquiesce to the majority in a jury when they're the holdout juror, you know, something like that. So it's just a reminder to stand on the powers of your own judgment in some cases, and that our social influences can vividly shape the way we perceive. Because those people, if they were alone and there wasn't the other 5, 100% give the right answer. It's only when we introduce them into this type of setting that they can compare their answers against the others, that they give the wrong answer systematically or in most majority of cases. Okay, so now Devin, one last thing. If you come to office hours on Thursday at 11:30, can we finish the review from 6 to 18? Sure, that's fine with me. So no problem there. You or anyone else that wants to take that time, please do so. And it'll be Thursday from 11:30 to 12:30. So I guess we're good to go for now, guys. This is the end of our time together on our Tuesday meeting. I'll be in touch with you before the class period on Thursday. That's going to be just your test time, and I'll send you the test form through Canvas right before the class period would start. And you'll also have that option to come to office hours if you want on Thursday afternoon. I'll send the link Thursday morning. Okay, guys, so I'm going to let you all go then for now. Have a great rest of your day, and if you need anything, please email me, but I'll see you then in a few and we'll be in touch over the break. So, okay, till next time, thank you. Bye-bye.